Oh, Marcel is there.
I think it's just Gege here and maybe the two of us there, and it should be fine.
Marcel, can we hear you?
Okay, no. I'm hearing a familiar voice. Danielle, you're at the end, right?
Perfect.
Hello, hi.
Yes.
Yeah, nice to see you. Can you hear us well?
I can hear you, but I'm trying to see if I can put your image a bit larger because I cannot see you.
I'm wondering if these cameras are actually.
It's somewhere. Is it that one? Yes, it's that one. You're not going to be able to see. Yeah.
Here. No. Yes, I think so. And maybe you have to put us as like pinned or something like that.
Well, it's okay. It's okay. Ah, yes, I can see you a bit. Yeah, I can see you better now. Yeah.
Can you see the slides, by the way?
I can see the slides. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, cool.
Is it you,
So
Vida?
it's working. Basically, you just have to tell me when you want me to swap. Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I'm just going to come here and wave to you.
Hi.
Thanks for staying up at midnight to present on
Is it
academic freedom.
No, it's okay. It's not that late. It's 9 p.m. now.
Okay.
So it's not too bad, but I'm super tired because I slept terribly yesterday night. I don't know what happened, but yeah.
Also couldn't sleep last night. It really took me forever. I was so angry, and that made me not sleep as well. I was so excited. I was so happy. The problem. It's better to be
Are you,
upset.
yeah. Are you enjoying the conference so far?
It's very nice and sunny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Having lunch on the lawn.
Yes. It's very
It's been
busy as well.
ages.
Yeah.
It's been ages that I don't go to Oxford. Last time that I was there was 10 years ago.
What? Well, you should have come.
I know,
What
I know.
we-
Maybe next year.
Yeah. For good.
It's already recording.
Oh,
They will, I think they
I
will,
think
they will
cut
put
this
it.
part.
Yeah, hopefully. All being well. So I think you would just have to tell me when to click, and then we'll swap around, and then someone would click for me. Is
Yes.
that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can sit next to you and then click afterwards if you want. Or maybe they have a clicker.
I haven't found any.
And we're sitting when presenting or standing, or what? What do you think is the
What do you prefer?
sitting is fine.
Fine with me.
It's quite a cozy setup.
Yes. Yeah. And hopefully, I think everyone will be able to hear and everything.
Yeah, should be fine.
I mean, and if they heard in the panel we were at before, I could barely hear in the room, but people were hearing online, so it was.
You understand me? It's good.
Yes.
Moss.
There will be.
Of course.
to help you for all the technical issues.
Thank you.
And also, I will let people in so we can focus
Oh,
on sharing.
thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Wasn't sure whether I would have to put up words.
Shall I go here?
Whenever.
No, I'm not here because I see the presentation and thumbs.
Clock. Oh, that clock is late. That's why it was confusing. We might make a start just so that we can get through everything today. Can you hear us online? Can you give me a thumbs up, Marcelo? Can you hear us? Yeah, very good. Thank you. You can
I
see
can,
in the
yes.
difference. Yeah, so it works quite well. So today we're going to talk about academic freedom. This is the second session in the series. There is a couple more coming in tomorrow. We've got quite a bit to get through, so what we're hoping to do is do roughly 10 minutes for each talk. We've got 5 presenters, and then take very quick clarification questions after the presentations, and then go on and have a bit of a discussion towards the end, if that's okay with you. So first, we've got Marcelo online to talk to us, and Marcelo will tell me when to click to the next slide. So over to you, Marcelo.
Okay. Hello to everyone. First of all, hello to my colleagues in the panel. Thank you so much, Rita, for organizing this wonderful collection of studies. And an apology to my colleagues and to the audience as well. I'm currently doing a visiting fellowship in Manila, so I've been here for 3 months, so that's why I'm not there with you. And I'm very happy and excited to talk about this topic with you today, because this is part of a larger project of a special issue that is been going on for 2 years already. A special issue that 2 of the panelists here are also part of it. Daniela Gracion and Gergely is also part of the special issue, and so we would like to show you what is going to be part of the editorial. So when we designed this special issue, all of the 4 of us. There's also Renee Zoltan Renee, that is also part of the special issue. And when we came with this idea, we felt that there was a lot of things that were not being developed, in the sense that there's been a lot of talk about academic freedom, but not we didn't know that much about the interconnection between disciplines. So there was a lot of these isolated discourses within higher education studies, law, history, philosophy, and so forth and so on. A lot of isolated discussions within regions as well, and not a lot of cross-national discussions, so comparative studies that could highlight. So this was our first idea and the first discussion as a stepping stone to create a special issue. And then now that you are coming to a conclusion, could you go to the next slide, Rita, please? So now that we are coming to a conclusion, so we already have 17 contributions that are published right now, and we are waiting a few more just to complete the bouquet of studies. And so what we decided was, instead of just creating an editorial where we just discussed our concerns and present the studies, we decided to conduct a bibliometric study of the field, either as a way to confirm our research expectations at the beginning, but also as a way to understand where our contribution of this special issue fits in the larger scheme of the field. So could you please pass the next slide? Yeah, you can go through the all because I have yeah. So yeah, it's okay. So why do you think that this is important? This editorial is important. First, because academic freedom is under pressure in both authoritarian and democratic settings. So this is something that has been confirmed since 2015, and so this was the main reaction at the time when we decided to create this special issue. Then the debates are global. There's a lot of global framing, but definitions, units of analysis, and imperial focus remain uneven across regions, across countries, and especially as well about attacks on academic freedom. There's still a lot of discussion and a lot of work to be done on that level. So, and on the other hand, there's a rising policy attention that is being faster, and we believe that the field has not been being able to keep up in showing and providing evidence that could support this policy, the policy developments. So our contribution, we present the first comprehensive bibliometric map of academic scholarship. We also, I've been working on bibliometric studies for quite a while, so I also wanted to make sure that we had like a kind of a sophisticated design to make sure that our results are robust and provide a clear picture, or as clear as possible, of the field. And so we also divided this broad field, which is basically we look at the term of academic freedom.
I just come here.
We have it's okay. So the broad field that we look at academic freedom as a keyword in title in the abstracts, and what we call academic freedom core, which we just look at the concept within the title. So that provides you a more clear picture of the discussion of the concept. And so we connect both the field within our contributions. That should be around maybe a bit less than 20, still yet to be seen. Next slide, please. So you can click another time that, yeah, okay. So basically our data and analytical design. So we look at 4 different aspects. So first, the field formation, trying to understand the evolution of the field, the creation of the field, where we look at 3,902 publications. Then we looked at the disciplinary home, so where the discussion happens within disciplines. The geographical focus, that we look at the regions and countries, and then the thematic structure, so where we applied the bare topic analysis to be able to map the field and to see which topics define the field. And so basically we replied to 3 questions. So how fast has the field grown? Where is the field anchored? And what is the field mostly about? So next slide, please. So the first result is that the field has taken off, especially after 2020, with an incredible exponential rise in publications. You start to see that there's the trend of increasing starting in 2015, which is actually a moment where there's a lot of discussion about the developments of neo-nationalism, autocratic countries, and also the lapidation of democratic architecture in different countries. And so you can see that this tendency keeps rising and increasing with an amount just in the last 5 years, 6 years, we have 44% of publications that were published during a very short time frame. So next, please. You can click another time. Yeah. So about the field formation, we have several indicators, but we just wanted to show these two. So what we call the publication ecology. So first we have most of the publications are articles, so they're published within peer-reviewed journals. But this is a kind of a trend within the social science or overall scientific production. So this is not new; it just confirms that what is the tendency. And then related to the countries, most of the countries that published on the topic are English-speaking countries. This is also, it's a limitation on our analysis in the sense that, we use Scopus, and so that's a biased element within the Scopus data set, and somehow it reflects then the type of discussions that exist within the academic freedom. But what is interesting to see is that, the venues quite expand, so in the sense the publication venues. So only in 2025, we have 217 unique venues. So you can see that there's a wide spread of the discussion of academic freedom within different publication outlets. So next slide, please. So looking at disciplinary homes, we apply several dispersion concentration measures to see actually if, there's a seed development, if I can say like that. So if there's more disciplines, if academic freedom becomes a topic discussed in more disciplines, and we can see that it increases substantially. From first 2010, we have 12 disciplines, and then in 2025 we have 35 disciplines, and all the dispersion concentration measures shows that. So the main, both in the broad field and sorry, I think someone needs to, yeah, thank you so much. Both within the broad field and the core field, the main discipline is education, and especially within higher education journals. So we also look at that into the editorial, and the most higher education journals talk about academic freedom and published substantially about the topic. And then we have an interesting combination of sociology and political science, international relations, and law, more specific within the core. So the academic freedom core, so publications that have academic freedom in the title, which is more targeted to the discussion. And this is an interesting development because you can see that the hardcore discussion of the principle happens within this combination of 4 disciplines: law, political science, international relations, and education. Next slide, please. So the geographical focus. Within the region, I don't present the results here because most of the discussion happens within the global framing, which is an interesting aspect, but it also reveals that there's not a lot of cross-regional comparisons or actually a global dimension. So it's basically a kind of kind of contextualizing within a global framing. So that shows that there's not a lot of regional comparisons. And within the countries, we see that the topic is being discussed more and more, paying attention with the different countries, and all the dispersion concentration measure also shows that. Although you can see that reference cases still dominate, and this is the case, for instance, of the United States of America, that is a very clear main focus of place of attention. Also China, and then specific case studies like Turkey or Hungary that receive a considerable amount of attention. So next slide, please. Again, please. It should be okay. These topics you can, yeah. Okay, so looking at the topics, so we have in total 20 topics. So it's a quite broad field, and we run several analyses, several models within the per topic in Python to be able to make it as crystal clear as possible. And so within these 20 collection of topics, then we aggregate them into 5 families. So the biggest or largest family is the rights, governance, and monitoring, what we called. And so you can see that here there's a lot of discussion about academic freedom as a principle, as a right, and the governance of that right. So we have questions related to speech, autonomy, legal protection, and more recently the monitoring of academic freedom. So all these instruments that has been built, like the Academic Freedom Index and other measures that being used in several analyses. So then we have a kind of a tie between what we call the internal academic labor conditions. So questions related to tenure, precarity, managerialism, where academic freedom is part of this discussion. Then external pressure and state power. So here we have these case studies, very clear case studies related to China, Turkey, Africa, and questions related to surveillance and other strategies that governments have been used that undermine academic freedom. Then the 4th topic, which is family duties and responsibility, it's all related to science norms, ethics, open access. So to what extent the science norms impact academic freedom and their relationship. And the last topic we called emerging contestation, where we have 4 topics that there's been a concentration about the Israel-Palestine, the conflict in general, but also the genocide happening, and then questions related to DUI and ideological conflict. And this is very US-based. So we can see that the core defining topics right now within the academic freedom core, not the general, is the Israel-Palestine conflict, boycotts within campus speech, gender, race, inequality, US politics, freedom of speech and expression, and then the measurement of academic freedom indexes. So next slide, please. So the main takeaways of these. So academic freedom has become a visible, fast-growing research field, and we believe that it became a topic of its own, a research field on its own. The publication base is broadening, but we can see that the strongest anchors, remain, in a small set of disciplines, countries, and core debates, which is not an issue by its own. What we believe that it's more problematic is that the biggest gap is not the output volume, right? That we see that there's this exponential rise, but it's the lack of comparative and geographical wider and more systematically connected evidence that allows us to understand academic freedom in a more systematic way. So next slide, please. So we end the editorial claiming or trying to invite the community to think about what will be the next steps on academic freedom scholarship. And so I believe that we need more cross-national, cross-regional designs. We have, in our special issue, we managed to have a significant amount of comparative studies, but still we believe that there's room for more. So better integration across disciplines, so a legal, political, and higher education perspectives. There's a lot of isolated talk within disciplines, and this is a major problem. And for instance, we don't think that we solved that issue within the special issue, but we really need interdisciplinary developments within the field. So stronger evidence on consequence of academic freedom decline for science and society. I think that's another development that we need to have and pay attention about what type of attacks, to what extent these attacks impact academic freedom in a longitudinal perspective. And then, of course, greater attention to understudy context outside dominant Anglophone ecosystems that still very much dominate the literature, but this could also be a case of the Scopus dataset, so a kind of a biased development. So next slide, please. And I'm just finishing. So a message from the four of us is that we believe that also to defend academic freedom, the field needs to understand itself better. We need to understand comparatively the field, systematically, and we also need to pay attention to these regional differences while remaining open to universal possibilities. Because when we talk about academic freedom, there's still a lot of discussion. What is academic freedom? And at a certain point, we are losing the focus if we are not coming into a more or less universal definition or understanding of academic freedom that also endangers the protection and the promotion of the principle itself. And that's it. Thank you so much. And I hope that I didn't go through that much. And I would invite Danielle and Gerli if they want to say something about these as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any quick clarification questions to Marcelo? Okay. I would like to invite the online colleagues to put it in the chat if they have questions, but then over to Daniela. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thanks so much. Marcelo did now the heavy lifting of setting the scene, and I will present a sort of companion study. We thought about it is very much work in progress still. Well, what's the news on academic freedom? So what is actually happening? What are we hearing in reports about academic freedom infringements, but also maybe protections and things like that? And for this purpose, we thought to do an automated text analysis as well of university world news. And this research is, as I said, work in progress as part of the NOREG Academic Freedoms Fellowship that I'm part of. And I will just show you some initial findings. Next slide, please. Marcelo already did a great job highlighting this kind of what we all perceive as an erosion of academic freedom in our field. And I think many of you are here because you are interested in these developments. And the latest Academic Freedom Index that just came out a couple of weeks ago shows that actually there have been substantial and significant decreases of academic freedom in 50 countries in the world. This represents more than half of the world population. And we see this kind of erosion, not just in the usual suspects, dictatorships and autocracies, but also the unusual suspects, the democracies of our world. And Concerning is also the fact that academic freedom doesn't just decrease on individual dimensions, freedom to teach, to research, to disseminate knowledge, freedom of cultural expression, but also on what the academic freedom index is as institutional dimension that was supposed to be supportive to actually developing further our ability to do, the core tasks of our work, campus integrity and institutional autonomy. And I think the developments we have seen in the past, months even attest to this fact. Next slide, please. So our question was, is this decline of academic freedom captured in higher education news? And for this, we did a media analysis. We think of higher education research news as sort of a critical case study, like the Sinatra principle. If higher education news don't capture the, downfall of academic freedom, no other news outlet will, because, if we don't care about it, who else will care? And so next slide, more specifically, we asked how has reporting on academic freedom evolved over time? What countries and regions are covered in the news, and what topics are covered in this news? And I will make a bit of comparison also with the findings that we saw in the scientific literature. Are there similarities or differences? And because in the end, these are different types of data sources that we have of understanding academic freedom. If you move, so the documents that we analyze, as I said, come from the University World News portal. This is the largest English language news portal providing worldwide coverage of higher education. It's a free online publication that was established almost 20 years ago and has more than 25,000 articles on various aspects of higher education. They develop their own articles, but also the academic community is invited to contribute commentaries, opinions, analysis, short, summaries of the research, or they pick up articles from national sources. So you'll many times find also from Guardian or from The Economist or things like this when some developments are relevant to higher education. Next slide. In terms of data collection, we found that by searching for academic freedom on the portal itself, we found almost 3,000 articles related to this topic. By searching the title and also the text content, but also the category in which University World News has classified this article, and basically built a database by web scraping University World News, because they also have a lot of metadata behind their web pages. So we could actually build very systematically a database that contains, the title, the author, the country, because of how things are structured on the website, and then did an automated text analysis. So here you see an example of basically, all the information that is provided, the country on top, the title, the date, everything, and then it's very easy to web scrape in that sense. Next slide, please. So what we see, they also provide kind of an overview of what type of articles they publish, but they only started to do that in 2023. But we see that most of them are news and then followed by commentaries and features. I think from looking at the authorship distribution, we can infer that also the ones not found are very similarly distributed. So I expect to find the same type of articles. But what is interesting here is, if you think, is that 10% of all the articles published on University World News are about academic freedom, which is a lot. So it's a really huge concern in the field. Next slide, please. But before I show you the finding, I just want to say there's, as I said, many types of data we can use to understand academic freedom. News, media review is just one of them that comes with its own bias by presenting events data. So we expect there to find, the worst things that happen in our higher education system, infringements rather than, positive developments. So with this caveat in mind, I just also want to say that University World News is a bit different than other news outlets because they have direct observations from scholars themselves, but also present kind of findings from surveys. So they provide a more of mix of type of data than what we would find in traditional media, let's say. And now to the findings. What we see is that based on the distribution of years, there's a huge increase in the last 10 years. So in 2015, we see a jump in news on academic freedom. This is earlier than what we saw in the bibliometric study. And I think this has also been publishing patterns. How much does it take to publish a journal article? We all know, and whereas University World News is quite responsive to author requests or to developments in society. So I think that's why we also see kind of it fits also with what we know from what happened in reality, that it started earlier than 2020, let's say. Next, in terms of locations, we found really quite a plethora of locations, so 246 unique locations. But this is because both country names, regions, global, and all sorts of other kind of fragmentation of geography happened. So this data was quite messy. So next slide, we kind of tried to consolidate this into UNESCO World Regions. So we have a better understanding of where the data comes from. And we can see that there's a lot of reporting on Africa, Europe, Asia, and kind of global developments, and less so on Middle East, Oceania, and Latin America. Next slide. And here we see also a development over time since 2007. We see that there's a rapid increase in news on academic freedom on Africa and the US starting in 2020. And also Europe already had, peaked at one point, I think, and also, Asia is on the kind of decreasing and in that sense. Next slide. And in order to get the themes of what is being discussed in the news on academic freedom, we did the topic modeling, LDA model. This is very useful because it avoids us coming with the themes in advance, kind of trying to fit all the articles in our expectations, but kind of the themes emerge from the data in that sense. Next. So here we see that overall there's a focus on infringements of academic freedom when it comes to the news. And I think this is also because of the type of data we are analyzing. We expect that infringements would be more prominent. And there's topics more on the top. There are more general system level threats to academic freedom, so global threats that are being seen, democracies under threat, knowledge security issues, and then more responses, either from an individual perspective, like kind of protests, and then more from a legal perspective and human rights perspectives. And finally, more specific issues around scholars' risk precarity, so these labor conditions Marcelo also talked about from the literature, and more kind of specific issues around decolonization. And next slide. To sum up, I think we see an overall also increase in academic freedom reporting in the news, especially in the last decade as well. Both the media and the bibliometric studies show a clear expansion of the salience of the topic. It's no longer seen as a niche scholarly topic. It's a high visibility global issue, both in research and the media. And this convergence, I think, strengthens also the legitimacy as a policy object. And that's why we see all of these institutional actors, especially at European level nowadays, getting involved: the European Parliament, the European Commission, the Bologna process, the Council of Europe. Everybody's kind of fighting to solve the academic freedom issue. But it's also becoming an object of sustained academic inquiry. We saw this in the bibliometric study. Most news, as I mentioned, were from Africa, Europe, Asia, and North America, less so from Latin America, the Middle East, and Oceania. The media coverage seems to be broader than what we saw in the bibliometric study, but still uneven and clustered. It is unlikely that academic freedom issues do not appear in this context. But I think one issue to do in the future is to map kind of what's the diversity of the topics across the region. So we see if some issues come up more in one region than another, and also to compare to the broader University World News publications to see if this is kind of a broader trend we see in their coverage. Overall topics, it's more about global and system level concerns about academic freedom, legal issues, and the repercussions of erosion for academics. We see a strong overlap here with the topics from the bibliometric study, but the media coverage is less around academic duties and responsibilities. So we don't really see the topic emerging a lot. This is possibly explained, but why can't the topic make the news? It's very unlikely that our everyday drudgery will make it. But they fit the themes around, external pressures, legal issues, and things like this. And also around the more emerging areas of contestations like knowledge security or kind of knowledge conflicts or ideological conflicts we see popping up. Finally, I think one thing to explore more is what is missing from the news. And I think what we saw is a missing attention to how academic freedom is kind of lived, practiced, and organized and negotiated in higher education institutions, what is happening there. But this is also a problem in research. We don't really know very much about how to solve this, or where it's going well. So I think this is something to deal with. And last, so as I said, a lot of this findings might be, very specific also to the university world news. So we want to do a comparison as well to see how this academic freedom article compared to the other topics they cover, but also maybe include other media outlets. Scholars at Risk has a data set of news, but there I would expect even more focus on infringements because they have a specific focus in mind. And then look also into how topics have evolved over time of a region, and if there is time to also investigate, what are the sources of threats that we see. So Elkan and colleagues have developed a typology of sources of threats, like looking at, not just public authorities, but private actors, the academic community itself, higher education institutions. It would be interesting to see if there is regional variation in what type of threats we experience in different contexts, but also, how this works out here. Thank you so much. And if you want to do something for fundamental values in higher education, this is my call for action. There is currently a European higher education area monitoring of fundamental values in higher education. The Bologna process has defined 6 fundamental values for higher education that cover all of 49 countries that are part of the Bologna process, including those 2 suspended, Belarus and Russia. And these are academic freedom, institutional autonomy, participation of students and staff in governance, academic integrity, and responsibility for and of higher education. Following this QR code, you can report positive developments, infringements, or all sorts of other things regarding these values, just one or all of them, and contribute to this monitoring process so we can get more of an academic community sense of what kind of issues we are experiencing regarding this. And there will be a comparative monitoring of these values coming up in the Bucharest and Chisinau conference next year, the Bologna Process Researchers Conference. So please contribute until 15th of May, I think it is, or 10th.
It says 10th.
10th of May, but it will be prolonged, I can tell you. But do it now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Any quick clarifications for Daniela? With questions from online or? Yes, please.
Hello, Maria Slow, ADCU. I just wonder, are you thinking of, if we go back to World University News about your study and whether it might be, you might publish an article with that?
Yeah, I actually thought about this, but I thought maybe it's good to finalize a bit what the analysis. As I said, this is very much work in progress, but I think they will be very much open to this long term. Yeah, but thank you so much for the suggestion. I now second opinion on this.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to Gergo, who has 10 minutes again to talk about the contextual factors of academic freedom.
Right. So good afternoon, everybody. Marcelo had an issue, the lack of real comparative studies on academic freedom and the decontextualization of academic freedom. So a lot of academic freedom studies is not really aware of the context in which the data are gathered. I think, and what this presentation is about is that we should be aware of the actual context of the lived experience of academics about academic freedom. And I would like to draw your attention to some of those contextual factors which might have an impact on the lived experience. And we should treat them, and we should really focus on those factors to have a more reliable and more accurate data on academic freedom. Yeah. So one of the, yeah, okay, that's fine. So yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So one of the factors I would like just to talk a little bit about is the political regime factor, and that's usually a lot of studies is about how is academic freedom in one country or another. What is missing from those studies is to properly describe the nature of the political system and link it to the patterns of academic freedom infringements. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the future slides. But first, let me move on to another contextual factors, and that is the disciplinary background of the speaker or the disciplinary background of the people we are talking about. So if Daniela gets something in her data collection, it would be very difficult to interpret the data without knowing what is the context from which that speaker writes his experience or her experience. And here I just use the Becher-Troller academic discipline categorization, but that I think there are differences on what kind of infringements we can experience in one discipline or in another discipline. And the third issue is, which we usually overlook, is there is a lot of differences whether we are working in a public university or in a private university or some mixture of the two, because academic freedom can be very differently experienced if you work in a church-run university, private university, for example, or it's a state-run public university. Again, it's a complete difference. Most of the studies assumes that we are talking about the dominant system or the dominant type of institutions, but from those dominant type and the experience coming from those institutions, other institutions can have a very different context from which academic freedom can evolve, right? So let's move a little bit further on the political regime issues. And this political regime issue, yeah, you can just put the slide. First of all, this is a summary of a lot of studies I collected. So there are studies based on different countries and how academic freedom evolved in different countries. These are usually qualitative studies, and they have a descriptive nature, of course. And what I did is to collected all those studies and try to map the political system from which the study was written, or which the study was written, and try to categorize the mechanism those countries or this political system used to control somehow the academic freedom and the problems coming from academic freedom. And for that perspective, I use the VDEM's categorization of political regimes. So I distinguish liberal democracy, electoral democracy, electoral autocracy, and closed autocracy. They have a different approach to the state or how to run the state. So in the liberal democracy, there's the separation of rule of laws, free and fair elections, and things like that. The electoral democracies, electoral autocracies, there are elections, but they are usually not fair elections. And they are much run as a kind of information autocracies where they try, the government or the ruling power try to influence the voters through different mechanisms. And that has a lot of impact on academic freedom issues. There is populism and polarization of the society through different kind of topics. In closed autocracies, there is a total centralization of power, no formal elections, terror, and whatever. This is just a very simplified summary of the nature of these political regimes. And within these regimes, academic freedom is infringed in different ways. So in liberal democracies, we can find this dispersed way of repression, meaning there are a lot of different sources from which the freedom infringement can happen, but usually these sources are not linked together. So there is not a coherent pressure on academics that they behave in a particular way. In addition, there is a weakening condition as academic freedom, which is usually the byproduct of new public management and efficiency enhancing type of policies. And the third issue is the governmental inactions, because they are not really focused on academic freedom issues. In an electoral democracy and electoral autocracies, there is the smart way of repression, where we try to create an atmosphere where people self-censor themselves. So there is much way how we can get chilling effects and how we can create an atmosphere where people are afraid of saying what they are thinking. And the way how the mechanism how that can be done, I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And in closed autocracy, where there is a terror, that there is a hard way of repression, and there is a total control over universities, there is an indoctrination, and the university has no freedom to do whatever they want, and they are part of the mechanism of repression of the world state. So that's the way of the closed autocracies. And I just tried, based on those studies, to uncover different ways of mechanisms, what we can find in different kind of systems, to be able to distinguish the link between the political regime and the way how academic freedom was infringed in those systems. So, for example, in liberal democracies, there is the culture of wars, and there is the efficiency runs and the securitization of higher education, and that the new public management reforms. In the electoral democracies, governments in the ruling as a ruling power, they try to establish parallel institutions which has an ideological purpose. Instead of controlling or ruling universities, they are electing or erecting a parallel institutional system, parallel universities, parallel research centers, which promotes their idea of science and promotes their idea of whatever. The third one, for example, in electoral autocracies, there is a vague regulations, and people are not certain what they can do or what they can't do in that system. For example, in Russia, they have regulations where the rights of the children, the right of the nation cannot be harmed. But what does that mean in practice? And having that kind of vague regulation makes it possible for authorities to selectively target people, and the rest of the people, they just remain silent, and you don't risk, for example, talking about issues which might have impact on all those questions, because you might be a target as well. And that creates that kind of self-censorship issues. I just mentioned some other way of things. And the closed autocracy, of course, the way of terror and actually physical, the physical threat of your family, of your people, of your relatives, that's part, for example, as a way how they try to rule these issues. So by that kind of map, I think we have a much better overview of how the political system and the nature of the political system links to the infringements of academic freedom. And I think the mechanism can be broadened as we have more and more experience. And we shouldn't focus on just one country, but we should have an understanding of the mechanism of all those things. Now, if we move on, I don't talk about this disciplinary nature because Rita will touch that issue in her presentation. But again, we can see that how the different disciplines and the characteristic of the disciplines has an impact on how we experience academic freedom and how we can infringe academic freedom on that particular discipline. Let's move on, please. And finally, I just want to mention, I don't want to go in many details, but again, we can theorize how public and private nature of universities can have a different approach to academic freedom. And for that purpose, I just used Daniel Levy's studies about the public and privateness of universities. And what we found in our research, or what I found in my research, is that there are two general approaches to academic freedom in societies. One is that academic freedom is a universal thing, and that should be enforced in all universities independently, whether it is private or public. And there are a lot of reasons what we can do, and that is usually the case in most European ones, where academic freedom is a constitutional value. But there is another approach, and in that approach, we can say that, well, private institutions are private corporations, and they have their law, and they have their own regulations, and academic freedom is not, it can be regulated differently, because it is the ownership and the property rights and contractual rights and whatever. So based on those laws, we can shrinken the spaces for academic freedom. And that's also a very sensible approach in some senses. And that is what we can find, for example, in the United States, right? When private institutions has the right to limit academic freedom, well, if they don't do that, there is some other mechanism in place. And actually, that's what happens in a lot of private institutions in higher education in the United States and enforce academic freedom, but it is not because it is legally required on them, but because there is a normative pressure on them how they can do all those things. And if we just move on, just one more slide. If we just move on, we can see that even in private institutions, I just used again Levy's categorization that private institution can be identity-based, elite, semi-elite, demand of servers. There can be very, very different way of academic freedom approaches and academic freedom experiences. And I just want to show that even within private institutions, there can be a huge variety. And that's why I think that contextual awareness is a very important part. And within academic freedom studies, we should be able to derive those major contextual factors based on which academic freedom experience can be categorized somehow, because that's very important to have a good picture about academic freedom. Thank you.
Any quick clarification questions to Gerda?
No questions. All right.
Vanessa, are you typing? Do you want to ask your question quickly?
It was not really a question, but more so a reflection on the typology. So I was thinking that what I find interesting about this typology is that it can actually be used to think critically about countries like France, for instance, as I'm French, which formally kind of satisfies all three liberal democracy criteria. And yet, when you look at 2021 intervention of one of our sitting minister, publicly framing post-colonial studies, but also gender studies and racialized analysis of French society in general as a methodological corruption of research, it kind of, make you think critically about how we can stretch this typology and actually challenge it in different settings. So that was just my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Your response, Vance?
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. So we'll move on. It's me this time around, and we've been talking about experiences and academics and student experiences of academic freedom infringements and how this isn't necessarily very broad in the literature. So today I'm going to talk about the case of Hungarian sociology. Why me? Well, I'm a Hungarian sociologist who's lived in the UK for 16 years now. I have been doing a study on a completely different topic. My research area is the research I teach in Nexus and how this pans out, doing a comparative study throughout 2020. And when I was interviewing in Hungary, one of the very, very important themes that kept coming up was as a tangential theme, academic freedom infringements, right? So because I know Gergo and his work on academic freedom, I thought, can we just try and actually dissect some of this data, because it's quite clearly important. So the good thing is that Gergo was here and actually talked about all the contextual factors in terms of the conceptual to how to understand academic freedom and the political regimes. So we're talking about an electoral autocracy. Obviously, that we had an election, and I will talk about it at the end just recently. But you can see the scale of change that happened in the Hungarian case, and we kind of dissected in our paper that's currently under review. The level of change, and there's a lot of reasons why Hungary became the poster child for the illiberal change and illiberal regimes, because of the scale of change around changes for universities, introduction of a chancellor system. Gergo's work looks at this in terms of governmentality of higher education. You will have heard about the case of the Centre of European Union, Centre of European University, but also the gender studies, and that has been quite publicised about Hungary. And more recently, there has been quite substantive attacks on all of the other remaining fairly independent organisations. So The study that I was doing was in sociology, because I was comparing sociology departments in relation to how they understand the link between research and teaching, and I was looking at Norway, England, and Hungary. But it was only in the Hungarian case where I saw this really strong theme coming up. I thought it would be really, really interesting to situate this within the academic freedom literature in terms of what we can see as the personal experiences. So the time of this study is 2020, March, June. So I was literally in Hungary at the time as COVID hit. I had to come back really quickly and transform all my interviews into online ones. But nonetheless, I had a really, really good response from both academic staff at 2 different institutions. These are both major research institutions that are, I'm not going to go into more detail because I'm going to identify otherwise. The institutions themselves, I was talking to academics as well as students, and in this talk I'm going to draw on that data. So it's important to bear in mind that the topic wasn't academic freedom. It was the kind of the talk around how the context was actually patterned. They had to talk about some of these key concerns. And I'm going to talk about 3 different major issues, less focusing on this particular one, but it's important to, when we talk about the Hungarian system, it's important to think about the fragmented reproductions of sociologists. It's important that the system is fairly underfunded. There's low pay progression for academic staff. There's an issue around massification and what that means for student experiences. Bologna has been implemented in a slightly odd way, where you've got very, very small credits, loads of courses, so it doesn't feel like you're actually going in depth into anything, and students as well as staff actually complain about this quite a lot. Research excellence is very narrowly defined, and it's seen as you have to have a brownie point, like in the UK system, but you have to publish in a certain type of journal, and there's a lot of pressure on that. Curricula is fairly inflexible, and it means higher workloads, and there is a huge generational gulf where younger academics who are more internationally mobile feel that their career progression chances are hindered, but also there is a gulf between the countryside and Budapest, the centre and periphery within the country. There is a crucial issue that a lot of colleagues have brought up in relation to, can we actually bring together our research and our teaching in relation to students actually working part-time quite substantially. So sometimes the students said themselves that we're not really working part-time, we're doing university part-time where they shouldn't be. So it's a question around who can become a sociologist as well in terms of inequalities of progression. PhD scholarships are very few and far, and they're very, very low pay. So there's an issue with who can actually become an academic in the system. So I'm going to show a couple of extracts around academic freedom infringements, and these are the sort of the key areas that were covered in some of my interviews. Again, this wasn't the key topic. The fact that these all kind of surfaced in interviews, and it was broadly across most of the interviews that something like this came up, is a really, really important issue. So Philip here talks about the sort of hardline repression that he sees as hardline repression, where he interpreted a wish from a Fidesz politician or the PA of a Fidesz politician who said they don't really recommend you doing research in this area, and he interpreted this as a physical threat to say they wish me good health. So he dropped the topic. So it also goes to show that it's when people step out of line, there's ways in which the system can actually go after them. But it also creates that chilling effect that Gerga was talking about as well, where, for example, Esther was thinking about what her PhD should focus on, and she said there is a topic very close to her heart that she worked in quite a lot of time. But she said, actually, I'm not sure I want to research this in depth, because there's certain segments of the media that will go and seize on this topic and start a discrediting campaign. So she said, I'm going to look at something that is also interesting to me, also burning, but isn't exposed as much to political scrutiny. So that sort of thing where you decide around, can you actually take personal risk around the topics that you're researching, creating these chilling effects and self-censorship. What do you publish? What do you keep for the desk and the drawer, really? in terms of that sort of new public management and what Gergo tends to call a liberal source on top of it, is Emesha talking about this precise issue around sociologists in the 70s and 80s, kind of drawing parallels with the socialist regime before 89, that to confront the state power, they didn't want to confront the state power, so they sort of did research projects that were technocratic in nature that could be actually used by the regime. Whereas now, she says, the same mechanism exists. We present sociology as a purely scientific thing, and we strive to do the Q1, Q2 articles as for which people get the brownie points. So if the Minister of Human Resources, at this point in time, there wasn't the Ministry of Education, is who needs that. If they say, you know, you can write a good article, that will make me good, they will leave me alone, basically. But she said it's actually pushes towards the topics that are published in international journals that might not actually be relevant in this sort of half periphery of Hungary. It might not be relevant to Hungarian society, and it might not actually appear in a Hungarian language anyway, if the international journals are the aim. So then what Gerg again referred to is parallel institutions and the political influence within institutions. And this is Bente talking about the pro-government think tanks and research entities. And before 2000 and in the 2000s, he says, so before 2010, when Fidesz came into power, the state apparatus considered as an employer for the researchers. So there was an interest in the research. There was research organizations working with government governance. Even in the first Fidesz period, this was the received wisdom. But after 2010, he says the whole social science education, the whole empirical social science thing has been devalued because they don't care what you say. We will check it out with Szerződvég, which is one of these pro-government think tanks. And we have accounted it by Nézőpont as well. And it won't be public. So these are not publicly available reports. These are all for the government to make decisions. And it is not something that we can have a scrutiny over, basically, is the point here. But also that there is no value in independent social science research that can be channeled into government and policy making. So there's sort of two final points I wanted to make with two more short extracts is the reactions of how people actually cope with this system. And there was talk around the sort of individualized versus collective responses, and some people have written about this from Hungary who look at how unions, for example, actually pushed back on some of the changes within academic institutions. There's a lot of talk around internal and external emigration, and this really chimes with the socialist regime again. So in terms of the external immigration is people leaving the country and actually making the decision to take a job somewhere else. The internal, so the within country emigration, that tends to refer to the point of you retreat from these spaces and you retreat to little circles of freedom, as Bibo István called it in the 70s, the earlier 60s. And it refers to the creation of small groups where you can feel at home, where you can actually be honest and you can actually talk to each other. It's still research and still intellectual interest, but it doesn't actually threaten the bigger structure around you. There's talk around the collaborationist roles within the parallel systems, and it's really interesting how these are perceived, and it will be even more interesting in the context of the new the changes in the political regime. And I'll show you an extract on that. There is also this sort of compliance with managerialism that Emesha talked about in the previous extract as well, but also quite a lot of colleagues that have referred to, and even very, very often students refer to this resistance, the protest and this collectivism, where there has been a lot of protest in the last 16 years against the government. And it became a very, very important identification moment for a lot of those colleagues who said, actually, I became more of an activist and I'm not really an academic anymore in some senses. Students also said this is a very, very important aspect for them to see that sociologists who work within to understand society, they also actually want to make changes through their activism and through their commentating. So again, from Philippe, we reflected on this collaboration and this roles, but also the fact that it's incredibly difficult to step out of it because the regime has been so permeating and through everything. It's impossible to kind of pull yourself out of it. You have to make a living if you live here. So you can either emigrate, you can take a job in private organizations, or you need to make a choice of what you actually take and what you don't take. What are the things that you actually accept from the regime, what you don't. So when I don't have a job, then the choice is to do something completely different and go to work to the market. But you have to make some compromises if you're going to stay. Forgot to say that my photos are Hungarian cartoons mashed up with some popular culture stuff. It's just my childhood basically, so I thought you'll enjoy these. It's a very, very good cartoon, that particular one. So again, both students as well as staff talked quite a bit about their experiences through the protests, and there has been different waves of protests for different reasons over those 16 years. 10 years before these interviews. So again, Botton, as I said earlier, he says he's even prouder that those people who teach him are not just interpreting society, but also doing something progressive and proactive with their knowledge. But also Yvette reflecting on the fact that it's basically she became a political activist. She did a lot of resistance in the resistance movement against the changes, and she says it's this is a throwaway comment around. I just say this because it's decisive. It's very important. Defines the work that they do. Defines the teaching. Defines the research interest as well to a degree. So in terms of the disciplinary conditions, as Gerda said earlier, these are really, really important. So I think sociology is a lot more exposed than some other disciplinary areas to being the first one that might be dismantled or might be attacked. We sort of confirmed the patterns of academic freedom infringement in this particular type of regime, and showing the vulnerabilities of the discipline. And we can see the sort of pragmatic adaptation of both students and staff through subtle or overt resistance to change. So I just wanted to sort of close on the moment of hope. You might have seen that there has been an election in Hungary a week and a half ago, and the regime has changed, and there is a major promise by the new government that they will actually go back on some of those most detrimental decisions. So there's already talk around changing back the privatized institutions into public ownership, taking back some of those assets that were farmed out to politically charged organizations, but also even talking to CEU who have to be, who were kicked out of the country. So I think there is potential for hope. That's what I wanted. That's as far as I would go at this point in time. Our paper is in the review. Please do get in touch if you want to see it at some point. We're hopefully going to have it ready. That's it. Any questions for clarification? Questions before Brendan is closing up the segment? Yeah.
I just want to add an issue, just one thing, and that is that contrary to what we think about, that neoliberal reforms happens only in democracies. In this study, it was quite evident that neoliberalism and illiberalism very well. And the reason is that both is very much interested in the subordination of individual academics. And therefore, in autocracies and closed autocracies, they use neoliberal reforms, which on one hand makes these systems more legitimate because we are following and we can show that we are doing what liberal democracies do. So we are also liberal democracies. But on the other hand, we can increase the control over individual academics. So neoliberal reforms are quite frequent in Russia, in Hungary, or in other parts of the world, because they go very well with illiberalism.
Well, I'm Brendan Cantwell. Yeah.
I'm just telling you that we can do this together.
And I'm on this panel because Rita and Gregor and I have been talking about doing some comparative research, which probably my fault is slow to get off the ground. But what I want to talk about a little bit is governance, because academic freedom is really about governance, actually, I think. I'll claim, I'll argue. And I'm going to say some things, we can go to the next slide, that may be obvious and boring, and I'll say maybe a few things that may be controversial here. But over the past several years, my research is focused on changing governance, particularly in the United States. And when my colleague Barrett Taylor and I started to write this book, a post-liberal university, we wanted to take seriously, and this is not to say to agree with or accept, but to take seriously some of the political and philosophical arguments that were being made by far-right critics of higher education in the United States, and try to understand their objections and to understand the sort of philosophical underpinnings of what they were saying. So the work that I have done includes this forthcoming co-authored book with my colleague Barrett Taylor, and it continues in international and comparative context. And what I want to talk to you today about are some of the civilizational ideas that motivate many, but not all, of the contemporary higher education reforms. It's necessary to put some boundaries on my discussion. I make no claims that I'm speaking about or for the entire world. The ideas and politics that I'm describing may be applicable, but not always and everywhere, to the political, state, and higher education traditions found in North America, in many parts of Europe, and to a lesser extent in Latin America. My work with Taylor, building on well-known higher education governance scholarship, we developed the concept of governance accords, and I guess I can go to the next slide. And we define a governance accord as the temporary but stable arrangements between the state, academic profession, and public that establish both upstream goals for higher education and downstream means of pursuing those goals. In other words, governance accords describe the prevailing frame for what higher education ought to do and how it ought to do it. We argue that there's an emerging post-liberal governance accord taking hold in the United States. And we surface two features of that governance accord. Well, more than two, but I want to focus on two that we surface that's taking place in the United States. First is something that is a broad-based consensus among policymakers and the public, that universities should have limited independence from state partisans and their agendas. And this is actually a bipartisan project, this idea that accountability is far more important than independence, right? The second form is more vigorous. And here, post-liberal governance is the explicitly partisan project of replacing liberal and neoliberal forms of higher education with a communitarian education that seeks virtue and truth through revelation and reason for the benefit of the narrowly defined demos. So this is about redefining the public good or the common good. Higher education is a state of contest and an institution enlisted in the transformation of state and society. The current policy project is often about restriction and reduction, but it's not just an austerity agenda. It's about occupation, colonization, control, and ultimately reclamation. So what happened in Hungary overlaps with, but is different from what is now happening in the United States. What is happening here in the United Kingdom, and what could further happen soon if there's a reform government, is different again. Because higher education is never fully deterritorialized, the nation state remains a category that we have to grapple with. And perhaps it's a category of more importance now than it has been in the recent past. And that leads me to this sort of question about what, if there is an emerging post-liberal governance accord, what is it? Is it an international project? Is it a transnational project? I'm asking that question. I'm not pretending to answer it. Since the 1990s, of course, scholars have argued that neoliberalism is the dominant ideology governing higher education globally. And neoliberalism and illiberalism, post-liberalism can go together, of course. Today, higher education institutions are facing new waves of radical governance reform, however. And while some of these are consistent with longstanding neoliberal policy and governance agendas, other political projects that are more fundamentally opposed to the basic tenets of liberalism are also taking hold. In contrast to the dominant neoliberal reforms of previous decades, the emerging anti-liberal political movement is communitarian. It seeks a more explicit return to religious moral values and national identity, often defined in ethnic and spiritual terms, and cast strong executive authority as a means for accomplishing these goals. Higher education institutions are global, and they take a global institutional form, historically shaped by and internally driven by liberal and neoliberal logics. From our situated vantage point, then, the rising anti-liberal tendencies that we see look less like reforms and more like existential crisis and catastrophe. And I think that feeling of catastrophe is present, in the presentations we've heard today, and certainly I feel like I'm in a crisis and a catastrophe every many days. I'll take a very brief aside. I was like on my way here, and I got an email from the provost saying, "Are you teaching the Constitution next semester?" And I thought, and I realized this went to every person in the university. And I'm trying to figure out why the hell they're asking us if we're teaching the Constitution. It's probably because our congressman demanded from the university to know, and had, report back. So anyway, I want to spotlight two dimensions. That feels like a catastrophe. I want to spotlight two dimensions of higher education's relationship to liberal societies. First, higher education institutions are understood as places for cultivating citizenry capable of engaging in rational, secular, and pluralistic forms of thinking and dialogue as political equals. Second, since the 19th century at least, higher education institutions have pursued scientific research missions that produce knowledge. Under liberal political orders, the research mission was understood to be objective, secular, and independent from religious authority, direct state control, and the demands of the free market. During the last half century, higher education institutions' dual commitment to a liberal public sphere and the pursuit of knowledge have increasingly been refashioned through the logic of market competition. Rather than educating students as political agents, neoliberal institutions have educated students as future job seekers, and the research mission has been increasingly tied to the institutions and logics of capitalism. Political theorists have long argued that neither liberalism nor neoliberalism are fully coherent projects, right? When put into practice, these socio-political rationales tend to generate internal tensions and contradictions. Even as neoliberal realities come to define the sector, the popular image of higher education's liberal missions do not fade away. Space opened between public aspirations that university attendance marked a person for a life in a society where individuals could attain social position and exercise agency in their communities, and the realities of campuses that were devoted to efforts of winning marketized competitions, competing in the quasi-market. The post-liberal agenda for governing higher education took root in this space, repurposing existing liberal and neoliberal mechanisms while developing new ones intended to bring higher education into closer alignment with state priorities. And next slide. So now I'm going to think a little bit about what some of these post-liberals are saying. And I'll start with the Irish scholar and Fidesz party enthusiast, Philip Pilkington, who argues in his book on the collapse of global liberalism. And I want to remind you, I'm not endorsing these arguments or saying they're correct. I'm just trying to understand them. He argues that liberalism and neoliberalism and Marxism are all essentially the same. And these political projects inevitably lead to excess and collapse, he argues, because they assign value through identity, social identity, and exchange, rather than through intrinsic ordering within a community that is ostensibly revealed by God. Adrian Pabst, a German-born, UK-educated political scientist and professor at the University of Kent, says that post-liberalism now represents the center ground in UK politics. And he writes, and I quote, post-liberalism signals a shift from rampant market capitalism to economic justice and reciprocity. In society, it signals a shift from individualism and egalitarianism to social solidarity and fraternal relations. And politically, it signals a shift from the minority politics of vested interests and group identity to a majority politics based on a balance of interests and shared identity. End quote. The American political theorist, Patrick Deneen, who's associated with a group of highly influential post-liberal Catholic integralists. And Patrick Deneen, I think, is one of the people who coined this term post-liberal. He described himself as a post-liberal political theorist. He's theorizing state after liberalism. His book, Why Liberalism Failed, is extremely influential. Barack Obama said it was one of his favorite and most influential books to read, right? Deneen has repeatedly argued that university institutional independence and academic freedom are both morally misguided and practically impossible. So he wrote an essay that's appeared in several forms. Here's one form of it, of a blog he maintained on called Post-Liberalism, titled Against Academic Freedom. And in it, and I'm quoting again, Deneen explains, a community always demarcates the exception of free expression, not as a regrettable limit, but as the defining feature of the community itself, that which makes shared speech possible. That's an important line, that which makes shared speech possible. Outside that limit, restrictions must be informally or authoritatively enforced in the name of defending the very purpose and existence of the community itself. So we may assume that for Deneen, curriculum bans that limit what faculty can teach and research, what students can learn in Texas, for example, are not onerous impositions by the state, but guidance for maintaining the community. The most pressing challenges to liberal and neoliberal ideas about institutional independence and academic freedom then come from within. This is a challenge that I think is coming from within the political traditions of the so-called West, of the United States and of the United Kingdom and Europe and elsewhere. Liberal ideas are linked to a political project descending from the Enlightenment and were embraced in the 20th century as normatively invariable. Even many constructivists take for granted institutional autonomy and academic freedom as politically and morally fixed, as something that has to exist for there to be higher education. It's a kind of convenient essentialism. The world is changing geopolitically, and our colleague at the National Autonomous University in Mexico, Imanol Ordorica, I think captures the diagnosis and hopes of many when he anticipates that Western and especially American ways of doing things will become provincialized. Post-liberal governance, however, is only partly about geopolitics. That's my argument. Ideas and political contest are more central to the emergent or potentially emergent post-liberal governance accord in the United States and in other states belonging to the now disintegrating Atlantic geopolitical order. As Laura Fields carefully documents in her exploration of the social and intellectual history behind the MAGA movement in the United States, post-liberals often offer incisive critiques of liberalism, especially neoliberalism, on the ground that they autonomize society, destroy solidarity, and generate inequalities. But lurking behind these communitarian appeals, which I have to say are often quite appealing. I can read like half of one of these guys' books and I think I'm with them. Lurking behind them, however, are definitions of community that excise non-Christians, non-whites from the body politic, if not from humanity. And explicit calls for the restoration of a patriarchal society in which men dominate families and government. Institutional autonomy and academic freedom, as imagined by Merton, Polanyi, or Vannevar Bush, are incommensurate with this vision of society. So I invite us to think about what post-liberal governance in higher education in the United States, which was experienced and maybe changing in Hungary, as well as other parts of what we often call the West, reveal about the tensions, failures, and inconsistencies of neoliberal and liberal governance and of our forms of higher education. And what about the consequences and to think about the consequences of the most plausible emergent governance accords, which I fear may likely be this kind of reactionary post-liberalism. So thanks. Oh yes, sorry. Last slide. I'm selling books, so there's the QR code.
Very good. Any quick questions just to Brendan?
Yeah, look, I think that's very convincing, Brendan. And and your point about the appeal of the communitarian is strong. There's something Dewey-like in some of these arguments, isn't there? So, I mean, what does that mean for us? I mean, I think what it might mean for us is that where we're different, I think, is diversity. The emphasis on diversity instead of singular identity, nativist borders, that kind of thing. So that's a position higher education in still a kind of permanently de facto challenging role, in the sense that it has large communities. They're almost diverse despite themselves. Even if they try to organise themselves in a culturally uniform way, they won't succeed. There are too many people from too many places in them. And of course, the intellectual agenda is plural. I mean, there are different disciplines and so on. So even if you kind of sanitise it in a sort of right-wing communitarian way, you're still going to be left with some kind of plural voices. So I think we're permanently positioned as a kind of dangerous zone and in a position of opposition. So if these ideas do take hold, then there's every prospect they could consolidate and become, if you like, the mainstream, the dominant way of thinking in the United States and elsewhere, as they were at Hungary. What's the future for higher education in that environment? Does it have to be undone, or can it survive in some limited form?
Yeah, I think that's an open question. I think that the future, if this project were to take hold and have more coercive authority and become something close to totalizing, I think that higher education has to shrink to peel off that diversity. And I think that that's why you'll see appeals, for example, to a lot of very conservative reformers in the United States are making appeals to meritocracy in a particular way about we need to return to a kind of curriculum that is extremely demanding, that requires us to sit around and read just a handful of pre-chosen books in a particular way. You have to study Straussian reading of this very, very rigorously and carefully as a way to exclude, not only by sort of boxing out other approaches and peeling back, especially science, but also imposing time and cognitive demands on people that they cannot satisfy, as people, the majority of people engage in mass higher education today. So I think the goal would be to shrink it and to make it more humanistic, less scientific, but define community and the humanities in a very quite narrow way.
Well, thank you. We'll open it up. So any questions to any of the speakers and or just generally any thoughts on academic freedom? We've got 10 minutes to have a chat. Really. But thank you for your presentation as well. Did we clap, Brendan, yet?
I'm Anna Smolensk. I'd like to thank the participants of the session. Very good set of papers we feel and very important. Again, this paper was very good. I like that you made this new to things because it's very important. I think it's very helpful to have this binary and particularly doesn't explain anything. So we should really look at how the so-called complex states are proceed quite quickly. And I think maybe to kind of emphasize the importance of the factor, maybe you shouldn't say that it's contextual factors. Maybe you somehow can integrate into conceptualization. So it's not something set aside, it's not important. But when I looked at the title, I thought contextual factor. Could it be? But actually, this is the core because it's the conditions of academic freedom, the kind of environment that this which found it. And we can see in the United States what's happened as the kind of general environment changed, the academic freedom just shrinks, and that's it. So this ideal American democracy and American academic freedom, where it is. So well, this is actually quite. And maybe just another quick comment to Brandon. I think not only diversity, but we should emphasize the kind of universalist or global kind of dimension of higher education, because this national container or community container is important, but it's constrained.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for an amazing panel, really interesting. Warren Shaw from the Geneva Graduate Institute. One question, if you had found anything in your research around freedom to teach, freedom to learn, if there were any tensions or intergenerational solidarities there between students and academics. And then a question on the liberal, illiberal, neoliberal question. And this is something that I've been sort of scratching around in my head for a little while. Liberalism, political liberalism, has a very long genealogy, and it comes through philosophy and political philosophy. Neoliberalism, it seems to me, has come through neoclassical economics, and that's only 50 years old as a way of thinking about economics, as a way of thinking about society, individuals, etc. And so the fact that a sort of economically derived neoliberalism can sit quite comfortably alongside a political illiberalism does not seem shocking to me. So I think just sort of thinking about this word liberal and how it's been used, abused, and misused, and how we can actually think about where it comes from and how it is being used now to cover certain things up, like whatever it is that you were talking about there, I think is important. And so where is it in tension, and where is it actually quite productive? Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk about Giovanni.
Yeah, so we what we found is that academic freedom is a very dense concept. If we ask academics to talk about what academic freedom is, they are going to discuss a lot of different issues. So we started to conceptualize and break down to some of the elements of the academic freedom. And that is the concept we developed as the onion of academic freedom. That's the metaphor of academic freedom, and it contains the major rights. In the core of the onion, there is the freedom to learn, the freedom to research, the freedom to teach, but also to distribute the knowledge to intramural way, so within the academic community, and the extramural way to the lay people, and also the self-governance, because that's also a needed part to be able to have a control over the right to teach and right to research and right to freedom. And the outer layer of the onion, that's the protective layers. The part of that is the institutional autonomy and the employment security and financial security. And what we say is that actually these outer layers of the onion is not necessary to have in order to have an academic freedom, but they are kind of a protective one, so there's a safeguards. It is also possible that somebody from outside provides these safeguards, the state or whatever other kind of people. So if a university has no institutional autonomy, we still have a situation when there is academic freedom, right? So the Humboldtian University, they have reduced the autonomy in organizational, financial, and a lot of different kind of matters, but still there were a lot of academic freedom within the university. So that's a nice concept. And we try to use that onion to have a different understanding or a more nuanced understanding of academic freedom when we discuss that concept. And based on that, we can approach different elements and different parts of it. So that's.
I tried to get it online, but I'm afraid I failed. So Gerge's work on this it looks pretty good. It's a very good, neat conceptualization of besides those questions.
Yeah. So one of the issue there was the European higher education area. There was an annex on academic freedom where they described, and it was a 2-page long description of what is academic freedom. That was very difficult to transfer it, to convey to other people. Look, read these two pages, and even if that's the case, it was difficult to have a real grasp. That's why we developed a figure which can be put on a slide and that have all the core elements in it. So that was the reason how we can easily discuss, or how we can help people to talk about all those issues. So that was the idea behind it.
We'll get there by the time you actually finish talking. Yeah, sorry, any more questions, Maria?
Thank you. Maria Sloane, Dublin City University. I thought they were terrific presentations. thank you very much to everybody. And I co-edited a book which was published in 2024, which I hope was included in the bibliometric analysis. Academic freedom, core value or elite privilege, ? And the reason I kind of took that sort of exploration was really to distinguish between academic freedom and free speech, because there was a lot of muddle up going on at the time. And that the idea then that we have to earn the right to academic freedom, and that traditionally that's based on our disciplinary knowledge and we gain that through our peers, actually, is the theory. And you just mentioned in your last input, intramural and extramural. And I just would be very interested from any of you, the issue that arises about our authority to speak extramurally beyond our discipline. Because if I understand correctly, in the United States, going back to the American Association of University Professors, classic description, the idea was that the faculty had a real responsibility to engage extramurally on topics relevant to society. So I guess Chomsky would be a good example, maybe. He's a linguist, but he engages on everything. So I'd really be interested.
It turned out, yeah.
Interested in any colleagues' reflections on that fuzzy area about do we have a responsibility, or is actually not our business if I'm, an economist, to talk about, I don't know, psychology issues in society.
Maybe just a quick reflection on this. I think academic freedom definitely is not an absolute right, it comes with duties and responsibilities. Some are discipline bound, some are, more institutionally bound, etc. I think this kind of push to focus academic freedom to just speak out of your discipline is also like I would say an illiberal move in a sense, because it hollows out public intellectuals from our public discourse and life. And I think that is problematic. Also, in a context where we push for interdisciplinarity and connecting different research fields, I think that is like a kind of narrow view of, okay, you just, even if you think about our research, you can go deeper and deeper into this. What can you speak on in the end is like, your research question or that's what. So I would definitely plead for a broader view on what our role as academics is in society, especially thinking of the third mission of this access movement to higher education, and translating some of the complicated things from our disciplines to society, and also getting the feedback back.
I will give one more chance to Gergo, but then we will close the session. Thank you very much.
I just want to mention an analogy in a paper discussing that kind of issue. And the analogy was about the President of the United States. And the President of the United States is protected by the Secret Service because of his position. But this protection is not only during when he acts as a president, but also when he acts as a private person. So actually, the protection protects all his life and every aspect of his life, even if it is a public part or it is a private part, because he needs to be protected even if he acts as a private person. And that was a very interesting analogy, which was used to argue for the protection is a very broad type of protection. On the other half, I also have some. So I think people should be very reserved on which they are speaking and when they invoke this academic freedom issue, because we can't be knowledgeable on everything. And I saw a lot of examples when natural scientists refer to academic freedom to express their opinion and gain authority to their opinion when it was not really useful at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, just
When-
final point by Brendan.
One thought about, ways to think about academic freedom that I found useful recently is from a political theorist named Jacob Levy, who has this new annual review of political science paper on what is academic freedom. And he's a liberal, he's kind of a Rawlsian. And he takes up this notion that we hear a lot in the United States. I think you hear it a lot in the UK and other places about the marketplace of ideas. He says it's a fundamentally flawed way of thinking about academic freedom, because disciplines are social spheres that produce ideas. They're not trading them. And so it is the productive responsibility of generating, transmitting ideas that is academic freedom. Academic freedom isn't just this freedom to say whatever you want and exchange ideas under any venue. And I think that was a useful distinction, I thought.
Thank you very much for joining today, and thank you for your comments and suggestions. Enjoy the, is it now break or what's coming on the agenda? Plenary, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for joining online.
In May, but or we see like 70 papers online and then we're waiting for.
Let's take for a moment. We need a photo. Like to take a photo.
I do. Journal of International.
Do you want to?
The one.
Marcel is here.
Or my interview. Anyone?
That's fine. Any other?
Yes.
Everybody.
Yeah, that's great.
And then we need to, someone take a photo of you and me in front of your.
I don't know where the camera actually.
Moving over.
Right.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sleep well.
Thank you. Have a great conference.
Could I ask you
Bye-bye.
to take a photo of me and Daniela in front of the next slide? The onion. I just think that, I love theoretical